Royce O'Neale had a very impressive first showing, and even more so and more specific through the lens of his first game, had a very impressive first shift with the Phoenix Suns, bringing a lot of the things that we talked about prior to him actually stepping on the floor with this team, and just kind of seeing those things come to fruition was very reassuring. In a game that was played in like a 5-point box, he was a +4, which was the best of all the reserves for the Suns. Again, in a game that was ultimately won by 1 point, that's fairly impressive. That game also saw 16 lead changes, so that really speaks to how much importance comes with having that +4 mark in 11-17 to play for him in that game. He had 3 points. He was a 1 for 3 from the field. Did knock down a couple of shots that he definitely can, which kind of speaks to the role that he's in. Those things will come in time, but he definitely had a solid performance in addition to 2 deflections with the block and the steal. So let's just kind of dive into what's going on with Royce O'Neale's debut game with the Phoenix Suns. All right, first play here is going to be him just in help at the nail and just being in tune with the defensive game plan and who he's matched up with and how he can affect the ball and get the ball out of players' hands by making them play in the crowd. It's something that he's really good at in terms of his help defense. And then in addition to that, something that the Suns were having problems with, which is a byproduct of the movement that the Golden State Warriors have on volume within their offense, is when they force opponents to toggle defensive roles over the course of a half-court possession. Oftentimes, players can be a beat behind schedule or out of position, if not both, if their awareness is not on par. And here we see Royce O'Neale's being just that, being on par, being on time and on schedule, and quickly processing the action going on around him defensively. So rather than following Gary Payton II across the help line and ultimately conceding space on this empty action here for the Warriors as they flow off of this screen with Looney, instead of jumping across the help line, he stops and allows for his momentum to just kind of keep him right in position with where he needs to be against this empty side action. Ultimately, he's going to take away the look. And then in addition to that, not just standing and playing in space, but being able to impact the ball and play with activity. Just something that the Suns don't consistently have in terms of who's defending within their rotations that they're making defensively. And we see all of that on display here from Royce O'Neale in his very first few minutes to start this game. And then here on the defensive side of the ball, we're going to see a little bit more of the same with him. Kind of looking at him specifically in the chaser role, however, this is something he's going to get a positive result on this possession, but this is something that I will be paying a lot of attention to because I don't think it's a strong suit of his defense. He can and is capable of doing so, but to do so successfully on high volume is something I don't think fits his defensive archetype, and that's just being a chaser, running off of multiple screens off ball and chasing players. He's good with top locking, but when he has a lock and trail in a scenario like this with Klay Thompson, it's not his best. And it's just kind of looking at him navigating screens. It's a little bit tougher for him in terms of how he moves athletically. It's not the best in terms of his the archetypes that he can toggle through defensively, though he does obviously exceed at many other different types of archetypes on that end. It's not his best. He's able to get the job done there and then get into that little pistol screen to kind of set a matchup for Bradley Beal. But I'm just going to be watching for him as a chaser in a handful of the matchups coming up for the Suns and how effective he could be for this team in that role. And here going back again to the defensive end of the floor, just looking at him with Kuminga, and we're just looking at his presentation and looking at how he's able to, again, just being physical to the legal limit, pushing this catch up the floor on the post touch for Kuminga, and then guarding his yard, containing the ball, doing a great job sticking to the hip, again, being physical to the legal limit without fouling, getting up a decent contest. Again, no foul call here. That's jumping off the platform from Kuminga. And he's going to end up being able to get that stop. And then watch him as he fills the lane in transition. Now, this is a shot the Suns are going to certainly need for him to knock down with consistency. Nonetheless, it's just great play stemming from the activity from him on the defensive side of the floor. Something to continue to keep an eye on. And then here is him with switches. Eric Gordon, one of many errors that he had over the course of this game, not being on schedule with his switches. Nonetheless, Royce O'Neale, understanding what the coverage is able to take over with command and with intent and able to get the position in back in order. And then we're going to see him again as a rotational defender, this time at the nail. Again, presentation is everything for him, and he's able to jump over to that strong side block, understanding who he's matched up with, and then force this pass, obviously a long-range pass that's going to enable him time to make a closeout. And now he's able to flatten out action and just be solid defensively, not doing anything crazy, just doing enough to contain the ball, impact things, flatten out action. Son's going to get a stop. And then here on this rep, we're going to see a little bit more of him just in help, as we see him just kind of following Klay Thompson around the floor here. And then we see his play comes towards him. We're going to see him have a screen set on ball. And then it's the ability for him to switch. The early communication with him to Kevin Durant that the screen's coming. And then this little hand on the back to make sure there's no slip in the screens, no ghost in the screens, without there being some connectivity within the switches. Something to continue to watch for with Royce O'Neale. He's very good with the little details in that, not unlike Kevin Durant is. Ultimately, he's going to end up getting this switch here on Kuminga. Flattens out action, plays with activity, gets a stop. Suns are able to play out in transition. And Kevin Durant, one of the best transition players in the game in the last handful of years, is able to finish. And then here looking at Royce, playing on the second side of action here. Suns going to the angle pick and roll on the opposite side of where O'Neale is. You see him spaced initially above the break, almost right at the break. And then ultimately, as he sees the help defense start to shift towards the ball as it goes towards the opposite third of the floor, watch his disposition and watch how well he, and on time and in sync with the catch here from Eubanks on the short roll, that he's ultimately going to sink to the corner, stretch that rotation to Klay Thompson, and then not just stretch it just to get up a shot, stretch it, give him the pump fake. He has one of the best showing goals in the league, and then he's able to get into the escape dribble to the left, and that's depositing three. That's a dynamic that he's going to bring to the Suns that's going to be extremely important for him creating space. He's not going to be creating space in isolation, but he can certainly do so with the evasive and elusive dribbles to the side after the long distance closeouts and the long closeouts in general that he typically garners. And then here's looking at Royce being able to initiate offense. He has a good enough handle and is enough of a connector to be able to do so. And he's going to be able to get into this empty pick and play with Kevin Durant. He gets the short recovery here from Klay Thompson. They don't necessarily want to give up the matchup with Podziemski, obviously on Kevin Durant. So we see Klay Thompson in the short recover. But I want to watch the cadence at which he's able to get this ball to Kevin Durant. A lot of times, like I've mentioned before, the Suns get into these catch and hold scenarios or these just general hold scenarios that allow for an advantage in terms of whether it be positioning or with the reaction to what the defense is doing, to dissipate and then ultimately be flattened out, and then they have to work harder within the shot clock. Royce has the quick processing to understand, okay, the advantage has been created in terms of having Klay Thompson on the show, not wanting to give up Podziemski like I mentioned on Durant. Durant gets to a good spot and has the leverage. A lot of times at this point, if it's not Nurkic, the Suns will hold on to this ball, allow for Klay Thompson to get back into advantageous positioning, and now Durant has to work a little bit harder to get his shot. Obviously, Durant can be successful with that, but you want to make things easier on an elite scorer like Kevin Durant. And that's exactly what Royce O'Neale is in terms of being a connector, especially with these entry passes into the post. We see him do so right there before the defense can really get set. And because of the real estate and the positioning that leverage grants Kevin Durant, as he sees Klay Thompson try to jump back underneath after showing on the pick and play with Durant, he's able to get that pass to Durant. He's able to get into one of his patented zero dribble pull-ups, and that's money. Back to the defensive side of the floor again, looking at his disposition and just how he helps to shrink the floor on opposing players on the offensive side of the floor. We see him do just that here. Ultimately going to see a little bit of a slip here from Dario Saric. But we're going to look at another dynamic of his defense that really is underrated, but is going to have high value. And it's a big reason why the defenses that when he's on the floor with are so effective in turning teams over, causing deflections, and playing with chaotic activity. He's able to contest catches when he's defending a player that's catching the ball, but when he's defending a player that's ultimately trying to make a pass into an advantage, he's really good with his hand speed, his reaction time, and also just being able to generally contest passes. That's something the Suns lack in terms of defensive activity outside of players like Josh Okogie, Bobo, Yusuf Nurkic, and Kevin Durant. And O'Neale is bringing another piece that's going to be in the main part of the rotation that's going to do that consistently. We see that here with Podziemski. We mentioned the slip that we see from Dario Saric here. That creates a reaction advantage. O'Neale senses that gets his hands immediately into that passing lane. And if Podziemski is able to make this pass without the contesting of the pass from O'Neale, this catch here from Saric might even beat Bol here, but Bol's able to be there on schedule. But again, stemming from the activity at the point of attack from O'Neale, and then in addition to that, the rotation from Bol by way of O'Neale's activity is going to grant Grayson Allen an opportunity to get up a contest at the rim, ultimately enabling a stop for the Suns, and they're going to again be able to play out in transition. And Bol's going to get an and-one. Very impressive first shift from Royce O'Neale, and just seeing a lot of the dynamics and activity and just spatial awareness, general awareness on the defensive end of the floor, activity that comes with a player like him, have a positive impact on the Suns. And then here in his second shift, we're going to see him again matched up on opposing big man. And this is something that's going to really be effective for the Suns. They have to do this in transition here. It's not intentional, but we will see it intentional in a couple of reps after this. And he's just able to play, again, physical to the legal limit, able to push this catch up the floor, ultimately baiting Jackson Davis into taking the bait, going baseline, and then being able to slide, cut him off, use the baseline as an extra defender, ultimately get a block. And it's going to end up being a jump ball. Just really, really great activity from Royce O'Neale. We're seeing his abilities to effectively guard up and be physical and just bring a different level of activity that can be a chaos inducer for the Suns defense. Is going to be ultimately extremely positive for them. And then here we see it a little bit more intentionally with that matchup with Jackson Davis. Suns being able to put him on primary screeners and in reserve units, or even when he's matched up with the starters, and being able to flip matchups and manipulate matchups and use his positional and defensive versatility as an asset is going to be extremely important. And we see it here just kind of flattening out action. The Suns going to end up being able to get a moving screen here on the second side. But just having Royce O'Neale be able to be that piece that can connect things defensively and really help to flatten out actions and dictate defensively for the Suns is going to be ultra important. It's going to be a great asset. And then again, we see him on the switch here, this time with Bradley Beal. Ultimately, he's going to be on Klay Thompson. And it's the awareness and sense of urgency to close the airspace. This is something the Suns did not see a lot of success with, but when Royce O'Neale was on the floor, he was able to bring a whole lot of that and then some. See him close that airspace, takes away the reaction advantage that's initially created by Klay Thompson being involved. Ultimately, we're going to see him put pressure on Klay, make him get off the ball. And then it's, the awareness to not let up. A lot of the times, the Suns had these spells where they would let up when they're guarding Klay Thompson or even Stephen Curry, and you obviously can't do that when those players are on the floor because the Warriors flow into action for them quickly. Things happen so quick. But he's on his toes, is able to get up a solid contest. In addition to Eubanks flying out there, hat tip to him, Suns get a stop. And then more defense from Royce O'Neale here. Looking at him specifically in this scenario, we got the late clock, last possession type of context to end the quarter. To see him keeping matchups solid, directing traffic a little bit behind the initial switch that's happened that has Kuminga being guarded by Drew Eubanks, and he's just trying to get back over to the primary screener, or who eventually is going to ultimately set a screen to flatten out action. So we see them a little bit of an exchange here. They're going to end up going with the small screen, as you see Podziemski going to set a screen for Kuminga. And we see the pre-switch that happens here between Royce O'Neale and Bradley Beal. Again, all just to see Royce O'Neale trying to flatten out actions, bringing that extra connective layer of defensive activity, being able to flip matchups, and just being able to generally play with activity and dictate more defensively in a chaotic manner is going to be extremely important for the Suns. We saw some of his flaws on display, but we saw a lot more positives and things that he can impact this team in a positive manner occur over the course of his 2 stints with the Suns in his debut game.